So hi there, everybody, and welcome to This Month in Procurement for May 2017. So if you're a regular listener of the Art of Procurement, you know that I'm always experimenting, and I'm actually going to see if we can get into a regular cadence with this show, with This Month in Procurement, and have it as part of the normal Art of Procurement feed. You know, we've kind of experimented with whether we have it at its own feed or whether we put it into Art of Procurement. And I'm going to try and put it in the Art of Procurement feed and have it, one of the monthly shows that we put out in the Art of Procurement. And if you've heard one of the previous versions of the show with Mark and I, you'll know that we try and keep things a little bit more informal than a typical Art of Procurement show. So with all that being said, Mark, first of all, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you very much for the invite. It's always exciting. I think we kind of slipped a little bit on last month's one, so we will now make sure we are very militant in terms of making sure we do this within the 30-day remit that we have. So we'll get that one in May in there, but we'll get on to this. And I think it's great. I think it's also just bring it all into one channel. It's probably easier to manage, right. And hopefully we can engage with your normal listeners as well. So excited to do it.
Yeah, no excuses from us both for next month.
Yeah, I'm sure the audience will keep us in line.
Yeah, and actually, I'm really happy today we're able to be joined by a guest. We're joined by Sigi Osagie, and Sigi is a writer and speaker on leadership, organizational effectiveness, supply chain management, and a whole lot more. Also, the author of the procurement book, which is really popular. I've kind of seen it a lot the last couple of years. Procurement Mojo. So, Sigi, welcome as well, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Phil, and pleasure to be here. I'm honored for the opportunity to join you guys. And hello to you too, Mark, and hello to all your listeners.
As we start, what we try and do at the beginning of this month in procurement is just kind of Mark and I catch up on what's been going on. And then Sigi, what we'll do is we'll bring it round to talking a little bit more about Procurement Mojo. And I know that, Mark, you've got a bunch of questions being in the middle of reading the book. But what's been going on for you, Mark, the last couple of months?
So be busy. Normal thing with Old Street Labs, new features, rolling out with customers and bringing new customers on. So that's been the key, drive, just running Old Street. Mm-hmm. We've had my other company as well, Procurement Leaders. We've had a little bit of a switcheroo on that. So, we've got a new CEO. So, we're 13 years into that business. It's always been founder led and we got Nandini taking over that. Mm-hmm. So it's been a bit of a change in my other job. The other thing that we've been doing a huge amount on is the AI side. So everyone's talking about cognitive procurement. We've really been starting to get into some cool use cases around that. And it's exciting to get into that space. So it's like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it. Not many people.
I know. So tell me a use case then, because it's one of those things you hit it the nail on the head. We hear so much about it, and nobody can actually tell me what it means or what the real world impact of something in AI is.
So we've been doing a lot. So there's lots of algorithms that we have running in our Lucid engine, but the key thing that we're being focused on is that insight around supplier relationships, or also customer relationships as well. So within the Visible application, we go quite deep into the organization, to the business stakeholders who ultimately are working with the suppliers. And it's about the information about those suppliers. Could be positive, negative about them. It could be press releases, how they've done something exciting with one of their competitors. Or actually it could be a competitor of one of your suppliers, working in a similar space, doing something with one of your competitors as well. So it's how do we bring insight? So I guess it's where Thomson Reuters or all these feeds used to come into an email box. How do we take the right insight with sentiment and understanding that it's a good source to the right person, the right time in a workflow application? And there's some great writing around AI, and where the success is the ability to bring that insight through to the right person at the right time. And that's the interesting part that we've been working on. And that's not just AI, it's also about workflow. So that's about intelligence around suppliers, but going deep into the organization. The other thing is supplier discovery is something that we've been really looking at. Capabilities of your current suppliers and capabilities of new suppliers. And how do you actually look at it? We don't know the supplier's capabilities until we haven't got a database. We turn to Google to try and find supplier capabilities. We're trying to solve that as well, which is a really interesting new problem that we've been doing, but it's based on the same data set that we've been working on as well.
Interesting.
Also, lots of workshops we've been working on. So we bring lots of people into Old Street Labs. Had a company in last week looking at their 2025 technology vision.
Mm-hmm.
So a big corporate. And I think if we went back 5 years ago, people wouldn't be thinking about technology in such a way of how does it underpin the operating model? How do they look at their current tech stack and really look at how that's going to migrate? And that also brings in the cognitive and the AI side. So we've been doing a number of those. Nearly every week I'm doing a workshop now. So that's a really interesting thing for most, increasingly kind of pushing my mindset and knowledge around, but also the stuff that I can talk to you about as well. So maybe we can talk about the outputs and some of those ones.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture of you standing in front of a room on LinkedIn earlier in the week at one of these workshops. It must have been one of those workshops.
Yeah, indeed. And how's it all been going with you? Because last time we spoke, you were just about to launch your new company. Yeah. I'm not sure you actually named the company at that point. So how's it been going with the new business?
It's been, really thrilling. So it's called Palm Bridge. And, we've already got a couple of RFPs in, which is exciting. So I've been busily responding to those. And what's interesting is, when you start a new business is, when people ask for things, they're always asking for it. It's kind of the first time. And so you don't necessarily have the information or collateral off the shelf. So there's been a lot of time kind of building materials to help kind of tell the story of what it is that we're doing. And what seems to resonate the most is around, one is people think of it as the Uber for sourcing. So how do you just go and get what you need when you need it to help you with a sourcing project, but also kind of activity driven. So you don't necessarily go and need to hire somebody to run a project for you. What if you only need help on a specific part of a project? And so that seems to have resonated a lot, but it's been keeping us busy. I've been getting out and about as well, doing some roundtables, so facilitating roundtables, actually around the topic of supplier discovery. So it's interesting that you just mentioned it there, and kind of what's some of the thought leadership that's out there, and where do we take things in terms of getting to know our suppliers better and doing it so we're not reactive. We're not just going to Google and doing a search. We're actually, that information comes to us in advance, so we can actually act on it and kind of get ahead of the game in terms of identifying new sources of supply.
It's an interesting space. I think that's one of the ones. There's a few startups that come into the supplier discovery side,
right?
Both finding new suppliers, but I think it's just the capabilities of current. So it can be an exciting space of how do we solve it, and it's kind of scratching my head why we haven't tried to do that in the past as well.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I think with it is it's one of those areas that you have to create them. I don't want to say create the market, but you're creating the awareness of why it's a problem to be addressed. And I think once people recognize it, so that was me, when I first heard about it, I'm thinking, what problem does that solve? Now I'm really understanding the value of it. I can immediately see that, like you said, why haven't we done this before? Why isn't the solutions out there previously? Why is it something we've never really addressed before? So that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think your Uber procurement is just like the great timing to launch that as well. So back to the operating model of the future. Should you have a category manager full-time in your organization who understands Microsoft licensing or whatever it is? Can you afford? And are they actually the expert? And I think the operating model of the future will be you're buying that time from the actual expert who's been doing that with other organizations, XYZ, to do it. And you'll be doing that by the hour or day. Maybe even outcome based. So I'm really excited to see how your company kind of progresses. I'm all over it like a rash. It's just a huge opportunity. And I think it also kind of kicks into the consulting side as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. And, let me know how it can help out. I'm more keen to see how we change the model as well.
Well, thank you.
Cool. I mean, it's exciting times. I think there's this inflection point that's happened, but we need to catch up offline and go into a bit more detail on it.
So, Sigi, I know that you're patiently waiting in the background and listening to Mark and I have a chat about what we've been working on. And I wanted to bring you kind of into the conversation and just learn a little bit more about Procurement Mojo, because I've seen Procurement Mojo, online. I keep seeing references. I see you do an awful lot of writing, and I actually link to a lot of it because I think I love your writing in the newsletters that I do. But I'd love to just hear a little bit more about kind of where did Procurement Mojo come from, and what are you referring to when you speak about Mojo?
It's a good question, Phil. First of all, I should say congratulations obviously I had a bit of a conversation with Mark about launching your business,
Right.
Palambridge.
Okay.
And I wish you all the best with it. I'm sure you'll
you.
make a great success of it.
Thank you. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
I think you will. Well, in terms of the question you asked about whether the title come from, I think from my perspective, if I answer it quite honestly, it really came from my own deep thinking about how can I come up with a phrase, something that actually encapsulates in a very accurate way what the message in the book is.
Mm-hmm.
It says it as it is and hits the nail on the head. And Mojo is a word which has its roots in African voodoo,
Okay.
and I'm of African heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So in some senses, it kind of flowed naturally, because the message that I was trying to get across, what the book is about, is really about helping readers learn how to put together all the different elements that create procurement success.
Yeah.
And that's really what your mojo is. When you know what it's like when you're feeling your mojo, but usually we tend to feel that as individuals with sports or with hobbies, and some of us who are lucky would feel it in the workplace as well. But what are the components that come together that create that? How do you actually achieve it? That's what the book is about. And Procurement Mojo as a phrase was a title to actually get that message across. It's
right.
a bundle of different things that help you create that special spark, that magic that gets procurement really up in its game and at the top of the tree, as it were.
And I was reading through the book, so it was great to pick up that. And Sigi, we met, I can't remember how many years ago. I think you were presenting at the Big Ideas event with Be Curious, and it was a great presentation. And I meant to read the book soon afterwards, and it's only this year that I picked it up. So my bad on that. But I think one of the big sections and areas you looked at is procurement's brand, and I think that's been really kind of underlooked by organisations. A few people have done it really well. But it'd be good just maybe for the listeners to talk a little bit about your thoughts about building procurement's brand and some of the key takeaways from that part of your thinking.
That's a great question, Mark. One of the things, obviously, I'm conscious of time. You guys are doing a show and you're walking to a time plan, so I'm trying to minimize how much. But
no, please,
one
Sigi,
of the things
you go into as much detail as you feel appropriate. Don't worry about us.
Thank you. I'm flattered. But I was answering your question about the title Procurement Mojo earlier. I'm talking about something that brings together all the different elements that creates lasting success. And if you look at one of the key areas that procurement functions struggle with, and I hear this time and time again when I go into client organizations, when I coach and mentor procurement professionals as private clients. And also just, you just have to go on Google or go on LinkedIn or any other social media platform or forum, or even procurement leaders you mentioned, Mark, earlier on. You can just do a quick scan of some of the recent posts, and, no scientific basis behind my guess, but I will hazard a guess that at least a third of the issues, the challenges that procurement people struggle with, either as individuals or the whole function, are to do with the perceptions and the reputation they have in the wider organization. So this is one big element of getting your mojo right. It's not just about doing procurement properly, but also managing your brand so that people perceive you as doing the business. Unfortunately, the world we live in today is one where sometimes perception can be more important than reality. I think there was a famous, I can't remember which one, past American president that said, it's no longer adequate to be doing a good job. You have to be seen as doing a good job. And I think that's what the essence of the procurement brand aspect of Procurement Mojo is about. One of the key things I mentioned in the Build Your Procurement Brand chapter, I say that procurement professionals can just stand back, forget about everything you know about procurement, and just stand back and think about if procurement were an organization or an industry, for example, and you want to build the right, strong, positive perceptions where you got the right reputation, other people across the business see procurement as relevant, see procurement as important to their own areas and their own activities. What are the kind of things that you need to do? So a great example is you can look at consumer goods or fast-moving consumer products, for example, or even some of the technology products that we're using right now as we speak. I'm holding, a mobile phone. It belongs to a company. You're working through probably a laptop or something. Those sorts of organizations invest significant effort. And I'm not just talking about dollars. I'm also talking about leadership as well as human capital in building and sustaining or nurturing their brand. Because think about it, the average guy out there, for some people, they might prefer Coca-Cola to Pepsi. Other people might prefer Pepsi to Coca-Cola. But there's a significant proportion of the market who are not forced. They fancy a fizzy drink, a cola version, and when they walk into a shop, they're just as likely to pick one up as the other. So how do you influence people almost subconsciously or subliminally so that they are more likely to pick Pepsi rather than a Coke? Now, if we bring that across and think about brand in the sense of procurement, how do you influence people across the business, especially where procurement is operating in an organizational climate where it doesn't already have the right reputation? It's not embedded in the fabric of the organization. So the way you go about it is the same way Coca-Cola and Pepsi do it and other consumer goods. You influence people subliminally in a way so that when someone has a sourcing requirement, they're more likely to pick up the phone and ring procurement or walk down the corridor. And that's what the angle of building the procurement brand is about. It's really about us telling our story, blowing our own trumpet. This is the value we bring to the organization. And by the way, these are the contributions that we've already made.
Yeah, I think you're right again. And so I think that chapter, that theme of the book and the chapter really resonated. I think the other part is that procurement brand is probably even more important now as we kind of go through the inflection point of procurement to move from the savings focus or that's what they're known for to driving, I guess, the speed and managing the extended innovation network. So how do we go value beyond savings? We did a workshop in Barcelona, which was a very nice place to do a workshop. And I brought in one of my branding guys. So he works with, the big branding company. The other part is it can't be generic and it needs to be authentic to your organization, to your function. And he's got this great image of a baby with a dummy in the mouth, and on either hand, he's got tattooed on the baby. It's a bit strange to you. I'll send the image, but it has love, hate. And it's kind of a point when you get your branding, if it's just really generic, it sits between what people love and what they hate. And the point that Gabby says that, you're basically the dummy in the middle. So you need to get something that's authentic. Not everyone's going to love that positioning of what procurement's going to do, and it may push the brand in a more value side, but also, some people will hate and love it. So it needs to be authentic, that brand. And I think it's more than any time we've seen a procurement side is now to become an authentic, and that brand should make the hairs on the back of our arms stand up when we talk about it internally and talk it to the internal customers, but also the suppliers as well. How do we drive this value, the competitive advantage to our business? It's an exciting part. I get excited when we talk about it. More companies need to invest more time in getting that right.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think the point you mentioned about authenticity is important. So in Procurement Mojo, for example, I give a variety of examples, all real life examples based on things I've done in different organizations. And one of the things, it's not about, so I started out by talking about, have a look at what consumer product companies do as a kind of, if you like, a sampler, a taster of what do we mean when we talk about procurement brand. But as you've just said, Mark, when it comes to actually doing it on a day-to-day within your own procurement function, you've got to look at the specific context within which your procurement function is operating. If you work in a global procurement function, it's a, FTSE or a Fortune 50 business or CAC 40 business or whatever it is, and you're in a strategic role, your stakeholders are splattered around the world, that calls for one way of operating and managing your brand. If you work in a small or medium-sized enterprise, which, by the way, the vast majority of employees around the world working, and you're on one site and your stakeholder is down the corridor, so there's opportunity to do a lot of pressing the flesh, corridor conversations, a lot of informal building. It's almost like, some of the tactics you might employ almost when you're wooing a new love conquest. Yeah, you want them to like you. You want them to think about you positively. You want them to smile and have warm sentiments when they think about you. And I think readers who haven't, got to that chapter of the book or who are considering it will get a lot of value from the examples that I give. One of the ones I talked about, which springs to mind here when we talk about authenticity, is I remember driving the turnaround of a regional procurement function when I was at what used to be GEC Makoni many years ago. And our stakeholders were splattered across about 2 or 3 countries. And in the UK alone, I think we had key stakeholders in about 4 or 5 different sites. And I thought about when they got to a particular point, we were introducing something called target cost management, which is a very defined process for it. It's basically, if you think about design for manufacture, well, it's like design for procurement, but focused on get the product cost right upfront in the design process rather than introduce the product and then start trying to do a cost down. So some of the key guys we're talking about here are people like the product engineers. These are guys who, they get really warm and they get really happy about techie things. When you're trying to talk to them about AVL, approved vendor list, strategic sourcing, their eyes just glaze over. So you got to be able to communicate in a way and in language that actually resonates with them. And when we got to this part of the transformation that was about introducing the target cost management process, because of the importance of getting it right up front, as busy as my schedule was in the middle of a transformation, I made it a priority and carved time out. And we went on a roadshow. So we visited every site and had a 2-hour session at each facility where the community of engineers and some product designers that were working with us in procurement had the opportunity to listen to what the process was about, why we were doing it. And one of the key things in why we were doing it was not about any benefits to procurement. Of course, there were benefits to procurement because they made our life easier when it came to sourcing and managing the supply pipeline. But we had to sell it in terms of the benefits to their own functions, the engineers, how it would make their lives easier, and then the benefits to the business, the PLC, the corporation. That's one example, doing it one way. It took a lot of time, a lot of road shows, and then allowed more time for Q&A afterwards than the actual spiel of actually doing the presentation and talking about the process elements and showing them the tools that went along with the process. And of course, we backed all that up with a lot of stuff on the intranet. If I swing and take another example in a totally different scenario, working in a large global organization, very similar challenges to trying to raise the profile of the procurement function. Because of where we were and the dynamic between the regional businesses, I had regional procurement managers and the center, we chose to do a significant number of things via the intranet. But locally, the regional procurement managers were doing the kind of legwork that I did in the previous example I gave. So being authentic and applying the context of your actual situation is all good and square, looking at what's best practice or world class is, or what Joe Bloggs did in XYZ FTSE 100 business, or what, Mary Kay or whoever did in some, Fortune 50 business. You might learn something from that, but what's more important is how you actually apply it within your own organization. And just remember what the end goal of this is about. It's not doing it because we're bored or because we haven't got enough work to do. Most of the procurement professionals I deal with, and most of the procurement professionals I come into contact with, are stretched like chewing gum.
Right.
They've got far more to do than, in the day-to-day, what we tend to see as the day job, than, having extra time for doing something that they don't see as relevant. So we have to keep in mind this idea of building the procurement brand and nurturing the brand. Why are we doing it? It's one of the reasons why at the start of the book, Procurement Mojo, I talk about the importance of effectiveness. Because when we start by focusing all our effort, every activity, every minute we spend thinking or pressing the flesh with stakeholders or designing new processes or managing our interactions with suppliers, When we start with the premise of we need to be effective at what we do, and we think about what effectiveness means, it means doing the right things for the outcomes we want. That immediately forces us to think about, well, what's the outcome I want? So when we talk about authenticity, the point Mark mentioned, and I explained about applying it to your context, you got to think about, well, why am I making the effort to build my procurement brand? You've got to think about that in the terms of your own organization. And for most, and your own procurement function, for most of the procurement folks that I meet, and, those who comment on social media platforms, it's often about the fact that, procurement doesn't tend to have a great reputation. It's one of the reasons why in the Procurement Mojo subtitle, I mentioned this idea of there are two aspects of getting your mojo. One is you got to strengthen the function. It's got to be robust. We've got to have the capability to get on and do the job. But there's another aspect, which is we've got to raise our profile and be more relevant.
So I think you're absolutely right on the brand side. And I think I'm just, for once, I'm looking at the time. So Phil, you can give me a virtual pat on the back on that. So, so I think the other part, just on that branding piece and the effectiveness, Sigi, and it'd be good to get your view, is this move towards supplier innovation and I guess supplier relationship management. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get your view, but I really love that chapter in the book around the supply-based management and the performance management piece as well. But as we go into the point of where we're trying to drive for competitive advantages, being a customer of choice, our branding of procurement needs to be even more authentic, but also going to a different persona group, which is our current and our new suppliers, and the way that we deal with them, and the way we collaborate with them needs to be authentic to the things we say as well. Because, and also as we start working with more startups, because they have the technology that are going to help drive the efficiencies in the business, there's a mindset change as well. So that authenticity is now going to be shared out with the outside world a lot more, where we're trying to drive something which we're not paying for. It's that innovation sometimes that we need to get, and our ability to work with suppliers.
Absolutely. The point about procurement brand and how it relates to how we engage with suppliers is absolutely crucial. So you're right to raise that and mention it. When we think about what the procurement role is really about and the value add that we bring, the value proposition that we have, and when we get it, we add, which is not always visible in the numbers on the P&L or on the balance sheet. Now, one of the key aspects of the challenges we tend to face in the supplier area is the history of supplier management. In times gone past, many large organizations were vertically integrated. So a lot of the stuff that we buy from suppliers today, from the simple stuff like reception services, security services on site, to the complicated stuff like actual manufacturing of our products, a lot of all that stuff was done in-house. Now we're talking about decades ago. We've gone, as organizations started to look at, how they can be more efficient and minimize risk, and how they can actually, if you like, focus on what they're really good at and let somebody who's really good at other elements focus on that. Why should Palambridge, when you grow to the point of becoming a Fortune 500 business, for example, why should you start investing in employees to man security when you've got, security companies out there that can provide you security employees? It's a very simplified example to get the point across. And I think one of the big things along that move away from vertical integration years ago was outsourcing. Yeah. And outsourcing, when many organizations got it wrong originally, it forced them to actually start to look at not just fixing things, but actually taking a preventative approach. So how do you get the initial sourcing of an outsourced partner, as well as defining your requirements, and then manage getting the contract tight to minimize your risk, but also to incentivize the supplier? How do you get all those things right? So I think the boom of the outsourcing industry actually helped organizations improve their supplier management. And some of the good examples were technology products. So I'm speaking to an Apple phone, for example. It's got the Apple brand on it, but of course, I'm fairly sure that it wasn't manufactured by Apple.
Right.
And I'm sure we can think of many other examples. Others are in places like the safety critical sectors. like automotive and aerospace. But one of the reasons why these kind of organizations put effort into getting the supplier management aspects right was because even though the manufacturing might be done by whoever in, China or in some other low cost sourcing country today, it's still your brand on the product. So when things go wrong, it's your brand and your reputation that is damaged. Yes, you can go through all the kind of commercial discussions and, liquidated damages with the supplier. But in the big wide world, the open world, it's your brand that is tarnished. So outsourcing was a big step in terms of maturity of how we manage suppliers. But I think it was limited to those organizations and sectors that had pushed the outsourcing envelope out. Many organizations today still don't get it right. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a shame because when you think about what we get, certainly in the direct materials or services space, what we actually pay for from suppliers, the tangible products or services, they're actually components of our value chains. So if you think about, let me stay with the example I had, this handset I'm holding in my hand, this Apple phone. Apple, I know they do a number of things, but let's keep it simple for sake of time. It's a phone company. The fact that they don't manufacture the phone is irrelevant. They are a phone. They make their money, their revenues from selling phones. Well, if you're going to sell phones, you better make sure that those phones work properly. And going back to the brand thing, you better make sure people have positive perception so they are more likely to pick up your handset rather than your competitor's handset. Now, how are you going to make sure that the phone works properly so people start singing and shouting the praises? Oh, my Lord, I just got this iPhone 9. It makes sliced bread. It makes tea for me in the morning. All the things that will make people have positive perceptions. By making sure that it's fit for purpose, it does what it says on the tin, but also possibly, maybe even more. What's that little bit extra you can get, you can actually give your customers or your consumers that actually helps to kind of grow the engagement? But at the end of the day, all of this is stuff.
I think your point about value chain is there. And I think we're finding suppliers come further up the value chain. I think, there's a really good podcast from the guys at Andreessen Horowitz. They had the former CEO and chairman of Pfizer. And he was talking about the change that's coming in the pharma space. And he represents or talks about pharma now moving to the studio model, where you get a molecule like you would get in the studios now. You get a script and then you build the company around that. So the studio comes in, you have the film crews, XYZ, they're built around the script as it goes through the process. Exactly the same thing for pharma. And I think we'll find it in all other organizations, is what's the core competency of the organization. And over a period of time, suppliers will come further up the value chain who drive their capabilities through, profit, and they can do it better than your own organization. So our ability to keep agility, alignment, with the extended, organization, the extended enterprise, and also drive innovation through, is going to be all important as we look at the enterprise of the future. And those companies that can capture that first are going to be at a competitive advantage to the ones who come late. So I think outsourcing might have started the process. I think procurement need to look a little bit, organizations now to look at parts. How does supplier collaboration become a core part of their DNA, both for running the business, but also transforming the business for competitive advantage as well?
I agree entirely, because I was going to add that in the future, I see this as an area that will be even more important. And there are a number of key reasons for that. One is globalization. The other is the unending push for greater efficiencies. It's never going to stop. Shareholders and owners of businesses are constantly going to want greater return on investment and, greater financial returns. But also there are other socioeconomic and geopolitical forces that will push organizations more towards buying rather than making more. So you can think about things like local sourcing content when you outsource to some regions, or when you move your manufacturing to some regions. But also, if we think about things like some protectionist measures, which we're seeing now, if you say, I'll use the UK just so I don't offend anybody, and as I'm in the UK myself, if we brought in some policy, or if the government in a subtle or overt way started trying to push a buy made in Britain type policy, that affects, how we go about finding suppliers. If you look at South Africa, for years, soon after the demise of apartheid, they introduced something called a black empowerment and economic, I don't remember the actual BEE thing. It's basically about encouraging buying from minority or black-owned businesses. Even over the pond in the States, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, you have many organizations who actually push or they make it a policy that a percentage of their sourcing is from either particular gender-owned or minority-owned businesses. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I was just at an event in Silicon Valley last week, and there were a couple of companies at the table who were talking about the fact that their goal is 10% of their spend. And these aren't small companies with minority-owned and small, diverse businesses.
It's a great example. So I think these factors will continue to push more organizations to buy more, whether it's a complicated thing that we're buying, in which case it's an outsource type relationship and we call the supplier partner, or whether it's the basic guy who comes in to water the flowers every day. And it makes more sense for us to pay someone to do that rather than use it. But fundamentally, those forces are some of the key things that will make more organizations have to get to grips with how they manage suppliers and get more robust about it. And for me, I see two key aspects. Sometimes we kind of, bundle them together, but I think there are two elements. I like to keep them separate when I deal with suppliers. One is the relationship and the other is a performance. The reason I keep them separate is you can have a fantastic relationship with a supplier who doesn't perform repeatedly. And you can have a very torrid relationship with a supplier who's doing the business on his numbers. So will organizations, in terms of getting the supplier management right, will need to make sure that they're covering of those two aspects. But often when we talk about performance, people think myopically about things like, on-time delivery, if it's a widget, for example, or, like failure rate, if it's a service, for example. But actually, there's another aspect, which I think either you, Phil, or Mark just mentioned the word and reminded me, which is this innovation element. And unfortunately, perhaps it's just the time that we are in the evolution of humanity. It's not something that I think many organizations have really understood and grasped, right? And as you said, I think you mentioned it, Matt, sometimes the innovation that we're getting is actually the extra bit. So you know how I was talking about how can the company give their customers extra and actually capture, drive the engagement? How do we get that extra from our supply base? And quite often, we in procurement, we sometimes are guilty of forgetting that suppliers are really good at doing what they do. That's the reason why we're paying them to actually do what they do, rather than doing it in-house and be vertically integrated as we were years and years ago. So if they're really good at this, then we've got to find a way to help them to perform to the requirements we have, whether those are requirements in a contractual SLA or whether they're defined elsewhere. But also, importantly, we've got to be able to tap into the expertise they have. Every extra year supplier spends manufacturing the widget or delivering, like inspection services is an extra year of accumulated knowledge. And those are the kind of things that you can't always capture in numbers.
Right. So, I'm wary of the time. We're coming to the top of the hour, and actually, there's a bunch more questions. I always find this. There's always a bunch more questions that I'd love to ask, but I don't think time's going to allow it. So what I'd want to do is, if I could just ask you, where can listeners to the show learn a little bit more about Procurement Mojo, and how can they reach out to you if they're interested in kind of furthering the conversation?
Well, I think thanks for mentioning that. The best thing for readers listening, apologies for listeners, would be to check out Procurement Mojo at the site, the microsite. It's Procurement Mojo, all one word, .com.
Yeah.
Quite simple, as the title says. And you'll find a fair wealth of information on what the book is about and the key areas will help you up your game.
All right, well, what I'll do is I'll include the links to that in the show notes for the episode today. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/May 2017. That's artofprocurement.com/May 2017. And Mark, we should kick things off next month with some more of your thoughts, because I know that you're in the midst of reading the book. You mentioned it earlier, so I'd love to hear some of your perspectives on this, but I know we've run out of time to do that today. So
well, let's do that. I'll write a bit of a blog post on that to kind of promise the LinkedIn community. So let's get some notes on that, and we can share that on the next one.
Awesome.
Sigi, always great to do that as well. But we'll catch up and go into some of these topics in a little bit more detail face to face, maybe over a coffee or beer as well. Before we connect off, Phil, I just want to give one new thing that we're kind of doing, or I'm doing now, is I am going to start producing a lot more content. So we're going to start documenting how we're building Old Street Labs.
Interesting.
So we are going to be doing a lot more video. The video is not going to be very good to start off with, but it will get better. We're going to tell the storylines of building the business, some of our customers, our investors, a little bit of my journey as I run Old Street Labs, but also procurement leaders. So we will wrap some of this up into a little podcast, so take the audio out of the video as well. So a lot more content coming. I've asked the listeners to also like, share, and also come back and say it's a load of rubbish when it is. And it will get better. So it will be great to get your feedback, Phil. You've been refining your content over a period of time, but we're going for video. So I think I've probably got the face for podcasting, but we're going for the video side.
I love the idea. It's actually something I've thought about in the past. It's kind of the behind the scenes of a procurement startup. And I think that there's few companies out there who are willing to be so open and transparent about what they're doing. Yet, I think that helps. We were talking before about authenticity. It helps people to actually understand what you're about and the people involved and the human element. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think we missed that when we built Procurement Leaders. We didn't really talk about ourselves and the how we went through it. So I think I want to do that with the business. It's really fun to share what we're doing. We've got great people, great customers, and we're doing some cool stuff. Now let's see how good I can present that on a video. It's going to be a little bit rough and ready, but it'll be cool. I'm also going to be in San Francisco in June and on the East Coast. So let's try and hook up face to face on one of those trips as well.
Yeah. All right, then.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. And I wish you great success with your new company, Phil.
Thank you, Sigi.
Even more success to you, Mark, at Old Street Labs. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
You guys then.
Cheers.
Okay, bye now.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.